Yeah, I guess I'm just more speaking to though, like in my personal life. If I'm just
Yeah.
going through my life every day, like if I look at the people who are dressed up, I almost never see them wearing a sport coat. The only time I can really imagine it is really like when I go to fancier restaurants and then, like the management, it's there or something. But for the most part, nobody chooses to dress this way just for pleasure for the most part.
Yeah, no, that's true. So like now you mentioned like sport coat, right? So would
Yeah.
you say that like falls under like your personal style, or is there like more to it?
Yeah, so that's kind of a difficult question. And anytime anybody asks these questions about style, it's difficult to answer because style is to a degree subjective, right?
Yeah.
But I would say that the sport coat, or also known as kind of like the blazer, has had a long lineage in the history of menswear. Like
Yeah.
the sport coat has been around for over a century.
Okay.
So what I'm getting at is that it's not just merely my taste that a sport coat is a fancier form of style. There's actually a social history that demonstrates that to be true. Otherwise, it would not have been around for as long as it has been around. Do you see what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
So, I personally do like sport coats, like blazers. I like more classic menswear, we would say,
Okay.
but I don't think it's correct to say that it's just my style
Yeah.
because in dressing up, you have to have a certain awareness of the history of the garments that you're wearing and how long they've been around, because that also dictates how it is that somebody's going to think of you, right? If I chose to wear just say, for example, a hoodie as opposed to, a double breasted sport coat, that obviously is going to demonstrate that I'm not as serious and that I don't know how to dress professionally, right?
Yeah.
But if I have on a sport coat that's more formal, it has that appearance. So it's another way of kind of controlling how it is that people think of you.
Yeah. No, that's true. So like obviously you mentioned like I guess like classic style more so, right? And I was actually watching. I don't know if it necessarily falls under classic, but it probably does. I was watching one of your videos and you're talking about like the impact and the relevance of like the 80s and 90s, right?
Yeah. So what did you want to know about that? Like how did the 80's and 90's come to impress me so much?
Yeah, like I was actually kind of surprised because I forgot the guy's name, but he was like talking about like how it kind of like influenced like and like how it changed up everything. And he was talking about like American Psycho and everything, like how like movies even like influenced it, like modern style in a way.
Yeah, so I should say who you're talking about is Giles Patule. So
Yeah.
he is the owner of Cast and Lane. It's a small but growing menswear company,
Okay.
and he also has a Instagram page called Cast and Lane that has a lot of images from the 80's and 90's. So what prompted me to have a conversation with him is because his profile is like strictly dedicated to that particular time period.
Okay.
And as far as why it is that I became interested in it, well, I grew up in the 90's.
Okay.
So I think that there is a degree of nostalgia on my part. There's a longing for that magicalness, I suppose, of
Yeah.
childhood and looking at those images from the 80's and 90's and thinking about their style and how to incorporate their style. It all kind of fulfills a nostalgic need, I suppose, to think of the past. But I would say too, I really think that the 80's and 90's, probably into about 2002, the early 2000s, that was really when style was at its peak, at least style in the classic form, because there was a wonderful blending of formal garments, like, for example, suits, and they were playing with more popular brands like Nike, right? So,
Okay.
wearing, for example, a sport coat with a graphic t shirt underneath it, that's what we call high and low. So, you have a high garment in the sense you have this fancy sport coat, but you have a
Yeah.
low garment in that you just have this regular graphic t-shirt. So at that particular time in history, late 80's, 90's, there was really this interplay between both casual wear and sportswear and
Yeah.
also formal wear. And I think that that's been enticing to me precisely because I'm at a stage in my own personal style development where I'm starting to blend some of these elements in. I'm trying to make my outfits more natural and less formal. And so that has meant blending in more casual and sportswear.
Okay. It's actually an interesting point because I actually was watching a video, like a couple of videos I've seen like lately when I'm scrolling on like social media of people like doing exactly that. Is like, like you said, like a blazer maybe on top and like a graphic Nike shirt. So I always did find that interesting. I'm like, you know what? And the surprising thing is it actually doesn't look that bad. Yeah.
I hope not. It's actually one of my favorite things to do. I will
Yeah.
say it's not as popular as it once was, but that's a great way for people to incorporate classic style so that it doesn't come off too formal or too stiff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you're going to hang out with friends and you're wearing a pair of jeans with a graphic t-shirt and you have a blazer over the top, that's probably not you're certainly dressed up, but that's probably not too formal. By
Yeah.
contrast, if you were to actually wear a suit, when you go to meet out with friends, it's going to be a little bit weird. That's a little bit too stiff
Yeah.
and formal. Yeah, so it's just a cool, easy way for people to start to incorporate these more classical garments into their existing wardrobe.
Yeah.